Hi, we're Ralph and Lonnie D. Mikas, and we're starting our new season of Astrologers Chatting Over Coffee. Now, that's a new format for us, and you might be looking at this saying, it kind of looks the same as Planetary Calendar TV, doesn't it?
Yes.
But there's a big difference. We have
Coffee.
But seriously, we're going to be inviting other astrologers to talk about things that are going on in their practice and in the world in general, and we're going to be exchanging ideas, and we are going to be moving to other locations from time to time, but we thought we would kick this off with kind of a discussion about why we want to change to this new format and what you might expect to see.
One of the ways that the show originally developed was as a forecast show, because we are the astrologers for Planetary Calendar. It's been published since 1949, so obviously we didn't start it, but we're the current astrologers.
Oh, we're way too young.
Yes. And how long have we been doing it now?
The calendar?
Yeah, how long?
2002.
Oh my gosh. So we've been the astrologers there for a while. In the last couple of years we took over as the publishers, but we originally started the show because it was a way in which we could do the forecast. So the entire show was actually the forecast, and it was with Carol Cherry, who was the publisher at the time, and Lonnie, and they would do the entire 28 and a half minutes as a forecast. And it was a great forecast, but it was very detailed. And then we realized...
Well, and also many of the people who have the calendar could read that pretty much for themselves. I mean, we would throw in our little insights and things like that. But as the calendar is evolving and changing, there's a lot of changes with the calendar and improvements. The reason that we did that was we wanted to reach a broader audience. We wanted to not have the calendar be pigeonholed into this is a professional tool or it's a beginner's learning tool. We wanted to be able to touch on topics and explanations that encompassed all of that. Because one of the things that we've been bemoaning as an astrological community for many years now was that there was a lack of people to hand the baton over to. Young people were not getting as interested in astrology as we were, the baby boomers of our time.
And then they invented the computer.
And then they started having millennials.
And then they had the World Wide Web, and it has transformed the field. Because originally, when we started in the field, there were no computers that calculated charts. So you would spend an hour to 2 hours calculating every single chart.
That's funny because we did a consultation the other day. We had, maybe 12 or 15 charts spread out on the table as we were working with the person remotely, local space, astrocartography, locational charts, solar returns, transit, natal charts in different house systems. I mean, we had a lot of charts calculated, and that wasn't even the numerology sheets. So, I mean, it would have been impossible to do that when we started out in the 70s as professional astrologers.
All those things, that would have taken a week to calculate, because some of them are very extreme.
At least.
The location stuff, the astrocartography requires very complicated math. And now you can do a major portion of it right on your phone in terms of natal and transiting charts.
And we are the first people to tell you that we are so happy about computers because that's part of our origin story. Yes. We had both bought our first computers in January of 1994.
Yes.
For the sole purpose of being able to buy astrological software and calculate charts by computer instead of by hand, because we knew that it would vastly enhance our scope of practice and the people that we would be able to touch with our astrology knowledge. And then in April, we bought software, and I'm sorry, but he bought a Mac, and so he bought Mac
and
software, and I bought a PC, and we were that kind of push me, pull you thing. But we hadn't met yet.
Right.
So in August, we met at Project Hindsight, driving a half an hour north and a half an hour south of where we were living to meet at Princeton University. And the rest, they say, is history.
Exactly. But at that time now, those computers, I mean, their capacity was a fraction of anyone's phone today.
I had 8 megabytes of memory, and I said, I am never going to complain about memory again because my father had given me a little Epson 8-line flip-up screen that had like no memory at all. And I was so happy to get rid of that and get this computer with 8 megs of memory. I was like, styling.
Wow. But it really transformed because, to give you an example, there's a concept within astrology which is called horary, and it means of the hour. And it's really, astrologers are not fortune tellers. You don't look at crystal balls and come up with an idea. But the thing that comes closest to fortune telling in astrology is called horary. And what it means is that you do a chart for that moment, either the chart when the person asked the question or for the event. And there's certain very specific rules about how it functions. Well, the person who codified a lot of these rules in medieval times was Lilly, the astrologer Lilly. And he worked near the sea. He worked by the ocean, by one of the big ports, and he would work with the sea captains and also with the investors, and they would come to them and say, when's our ship going to come in? Is this going to be, are they going to be in soon? And he would calculate a chart for the question. And so he became the real standard. And everyone's used these rules for years and years and years. And then a number of years ago, actually on the web, and during a discussion, an astrologer who we know very well, Alfie Lavoie, who's been doing this for many years and does a tremendous amount of this, said, people keep saying, well, you should look back to Lilly. And I have to say to them, quoting Alfie or paraphrasing him, Lilly in his entire career looked at 500 or 600 charts because they took so long to calculate. Alfie had probably looked at 50,000 at this point in his career, or 100,000 charts in the course of his career. He was way past where Lilly was in terms of personal experience.
Who's the expert now?
Right. And that transition from, the original patterning of astrology to now is something we really have to address, because we have moved into an age in which, the difference between men and women professionally is a lot smaller than it used to be.
Well, I think about the fact in the time of Lilly, there were planets that hadn't been discovered yet.
Right.
So how do you know what their influence on a horary chart is going to be? Because you don't even know they exist.
And they're not little planets. This is Uranus, Neptune, and of course Pluto's a little small, but he's
powerful.
Feisty. Yeah. But Neptune is very large, and so is Uranus. But they're just beyond the point, out there in the dark, beyond where we can see them with the naked eye.
Well, and speaking of Uranus, I mean, people, Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius. People have been asking about when is the age of Aquarius, what defines it. And they're not set times when these things happen, but I think that the inklings of the age of Aquarius happened around the discovery of Uranus, because we associate Uranus with all things internet, communication, revolution, all those kinds of things. It was in fact discovered at the time of the Revolutionary War. So there are undertones of that we became aware of at that time.
And this whole transformation in terms of how we manage technology and how we manage information really massively improved astrology. And the reason is astrology is essentially numbers. It's astronomy. It's scientific calculations. You're looking at the actual physical manifestations, physical phenomena, and you're measuring it, and you're saying, okay, there's the planet, this is the position of the planets coming up now in the next 6 months, okay? We can look back historically and see when that similar pattern, that has real similarities between, the future and the past, what happened then historically. And it used to be that astrologers would go into the library and they would, do a couple months of research. Now you go onto the web and you click, 1921. What happened in 1921? It gives you a long list of events that happened in 1921.
That to me is so fascinating. We had an astrologer friend who has since passed away, but she used to love to tell people that astrologers should not become professional consulting astrologers until they were at least 40 years old.
Right.
Because how could you give people advice until you had gone through your own Uranus opposition, you
Right.
know, which happens around the age of 39,
Right.
40. And so how could you advise people about what's coming up in their life if you hadn't experienced it yourself? And so when we now see things happening in the world, I validate her idea because it extends beyond just people doing astrological work for people. It extends to the fact that how do you understand the planetary weather now without looking back and seeing what happened the last time there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, or what happened the last time that Uranus was in Pisces, or whatever it is, you know, if there's a significant event happening, or if there's a period of time that is so colored by certain types of energies, it's so helpful to look at these planets. And that's when the outer planets are brilliant, because
Right.
they're generational planets. So they take a very long time in their cycle to go around the solar system. And so we get to see a progression of time on a long scale.
Right. And in fact, you know, Neptune, you know, we're just barely coming around. It takes 160 some odd years to go around the planet, and it was discovered in the late 1800s. So, you know, we're only now coming up to a period of time where we'll have experienced it in all 12 signs.
That's true.
Pluto's 240, 250 years. So and that was only discovered in the 1930s. So we will not see Pluto in all the different signs for a while. Now, Uranus takes 84 years. So we've had some, you know, experience with Uranus going around.
Not we personally.
Not personally.
84 years, but
Yes. But there are people, lots of people who have what's called their Uranus return, when Uranus comes back to when it was when they're born. It's interesting too in terms of people's experience. If you think back to when you were 12 years old, when you were 24 years old, when you were
36.
36 years old, and most people who are watching this, a good number of them will have experience of that. They all have like a nice connotation to you. If you think, just kind of think of when you were 12 or 24 or 36, they're just nice,
48.
Yeah, nice years. Why? Because that's when Jupiter comes back to where it was when you were born, and Jupiter traditionally has been the planet of good luck, expansion,
Optimism, hope.
Hope.
So they're generally easier years, because Jupiter stays in the sign for a year.
Exactly.
Except that we got a little short shrift for some reason. Jupiter speeded through
Aries last
our
time.
sign of our Jupiter position of Aries, and we had it for barely 6 months.
We got gypped.
We really were.
Yeah, which is.
And I think that we should get a professional courtesy. I think we should have gotten
so.
a year and a half.
Exactly, because if you look in the charts of astrologers, usually the planet that's very, very prominent in their chart is Jupiter,
Right.
because it's the sign of the professional, it's the sign of the person who gives professional, guidance, but it's also the sign of the optimist. And astrologers are ultimately optimists.
And it's a sign of generosity.
Yes.
And it is, at least for us, and I think for most astrologers that we know, it's when we work with clients, we are not stingy with our knowledge. We
Right.
are very generous, not just with our knowledge, but with our time
Right.
and our resources. I mean, the packet that we send to clients is
very
just
thick.
stuffed with little goodies. It's like their birthday. I mean, of course, sometimes it's their solar return and it is their birthday.
Right.
But a lot of times we consult with clients in between and it's not.
Right.
But we just, they would really be able to use this or this book or, whatever it is, an article that we've written or something like that. And so we add a lot of goodies into the packet when we send them their materials.
We'll take episodes from the TV show and put them onto the thumb drive along with the recording.
Consultation.
We have the calendar. We'll throw one of our books in. We've written a lot of books, so a lot of times we have a book that's going to address the particular issue that they're working with in terms of either health or feng shui or now astrology. We're starting to write in that more.
So Jupiter, I think, is a nice planet to have in a prominent position if you want to work astrologically with people.
One of the things that happened too, and this is interesting, is that starting with the millennials, there's been a real a secular tide happening where you have so many religions that are very, very structured or very restricted, and you have a young generation now who's growing up with the World Wide Web and conscious of the world. And so they're a lot less inclined to, follow these very tight restrictions. And I read a statistic the other day that the number of people who are evangelicals below 50 is only like 10%. It's a very small percentage that this very structured system is not appealing to people who are exposed to the world. And as a result, they're looking for systems that are more secular and more knowledge-based, and astrology is essentially a knowledge-based system. And the thing that people don't realize is that the philosophy that underlies astrology, and I shouldn't say people don't know that because astrologers know it, is the Hermetic system. And the Hermetic is the most ancient knowledge system that we can record. It goes back to very, very ancient times, and it actually is the underpinning for many of the world's major religions, because it's a very essential philosophy. And one of the tenets most people know is as above, so below. But a lot of the major tenets of, treat others as you would be treated, these things really come out of the Hermetic tradition. And they're based upon, the basic laws of karma, the basic laws of being a good member of society. Are you participating in a way that's going to bring good things back to you? And that's what it's based on. So I think we're seeing a lot of these young people, and now, the millennials who are not as young as they used to be.
Young enough.
Young enough, but they're much more interested in this because it offers them guidance that does not limit their view, because it's optimistic. It's looking towards the future. It's saying, who am I becoming? Who am I essentially? And who am I becoming? And when I encounter people, how do they repeat patterns I've seen before? And how are they opening up doorways to me into the future? And this is something you'll see is that, say, every time I turn around, I'm dating another Gemini. You just keep finding yourself dating with Geminis. They all drive me crazy, but I keep dating them. And it's like, well, besides the fact that we can look at the charts and say, well, this is why. And we also might want to say to them, you should really get over this. Or not, Maybe you have a moon in Gemini, it's why you're attracted to them. Or maybe Gemini's in your 12th house, which is why they keep stepping on your heel.
And maybe find a Gemini who was born at night and their moon is more prominent. And,
right.
Or somebody who, or maybe it's your karma to learn to coexist with Gemini. I mean,
yes.
There's a lot of reasons why those patterns repeat in your life. But it's interesting. A lot of people who studied astrology at the time that we did, at least, just looked at a lot of charts, famous people that you could point to and you could say, oh, I know this happened in their life at this point in time. Oh, let's see how that worked out in the transits in the chart and things like that. And by doing that, you sort of experience that transit that they were having without having to experience it yourself. You kind of see how that works out in the chart. And I find that the Gen Xers and the millennials, when they were first faced with studying astrology, they weren't really that interested in doing that. And I think that the Gen Xers kind of like just hung back from and looked at astrology from the point of, well, I want to understand my chart and I want to see what's going on with me. And I know that I'm talking in broad terms. There certainly are many Gen X astrologers who took it more seriously. But I'm finding with the millennials that they're looking at all their friends' charts. And so they're like becoming the hub of the holder of the information. They've got friends that are a few years older, so they've gone through something they haven't gone through yet. They got friends that are a few years younger. And I see it specifically in my granddaughter, who is a millennial, and
right.
She is very seriously interested in studying astrology. And we have a lot of communication, a lot of questions, a lot of back and forth about it. And I'm just really heartened to see how she's kind of doing the same thing that we did, but because the world was so different, people weren't sharing their experiences personally that much. We lived much more private lives,
right.
I would say, as boomers. But the millennials share everything.
Right.
They each know, in their circle of friends, they know everything that everybody's going through, So they're looking at each other's charts and kind of supporting each other and building their own communities in the astrological world.
Exactly. And our this particular granddaughter is really the youngest of the millennials and maybe just the oldest of the next generation. So she's really on that line between the two. You know, it's interesting. But I think it's also that it took a while for the generation of computer charts to be so easily accessible. You know, you can go online and have them and calculate them for free every place. You had to get to a certain percentage of places where you could find it for it to really take off. Originally, when we first bought our computers, I mean, this was a bunch of years ago. These things were like $2,000. It was a huge amount of money because there simply weren't that many computers, and the software was expensive. It was a big commitment. And over the years, now, of course, the price of computers have come down.
But we still pay $2,000
We still
for
pay
computers.
$2,000,
at least.
but now we could launch the space shuttle with what we have.
But now they fold the clothes and put it in the drawers. I mean, they do things that no computers ever have done before.
Exactly. And the point of this is that the availability of this for people, that you could be in Bangkok and you could go online and calculate charts. And you could calculate the charts in sidereal or tropical or Placidus or whole sign, or, you know, I'm sure you could find some place where you could calculate astrocartography and local space online as well. And, you know, I have I think 2 different programs on my phone to do this. The accessibility of this kind of information is so important.
That's an interesting thing because I find it fascinating with the quality and level of performance of the apps that we have on our phone to calculate charts. I mean, we'll sit and watch the news and we'll hear somebody say something. We'll say, oh, we have to know what their chart looks like. And although we don't know the time, you can look and you can get a good idea about the underpinnings of the person. And it's a very interesting time where, you know, information comes at the speed of sound. I mean, it really boosts your knowledge. We were talking to a client the other day who had been studying astrology for a long time and felt like it was just a really super long process. And of course it can be. But we were marveling at the fact that we've mentioned this many times, the fact that since we met, we were already professional astrologers when we met, but our level of understanding of astrology boosted exponentially after we met because we get to talk about it every single day.
Yes.
We get to bounce ideas off of each other. We get to do research, or we've had some very interesting research projects that we've done. Ralph being an artist, we did a research project on the charts of artists. It was called Different Drummer Research because everybody marched to a slightly different drum beat. And it was fascinating to be able to look at the charts of all these artists and pick out which ones worked in marble, which ones worked in metal, which ones worked in found materials, which one worked in paints and pastels or charcoals. It was just a fascinating way to look at a group of people and find out how you differentiated. So you have to look at a lot of Gemini's charts before you take them out of your dating pool.
Yeah, right. And this accessibility is really incredible. Something I've been doing recently, and I've noticed it on our TV, is you can click down into information about it, and it will say cast and crew. And then you click down to the cast and crew, and it gives you the people. You click on there, it tells you their birth date in most cases. One thing I have noticed is that there's a tremendous number of Capricorns and Aquarians in Pisceans in big movies, which are the wintertime sites. Those are the last 3 months of winter. And it's funny because they're actually the least egocentric. You know, the most egocentric are the Cancerians and the Leos. And you'd think they're the ones who like to be on stage. And I have a funny feeling if you looked at stage actors, you'd find more Cancerians and Leos. There are a tremendous number of successful Cancerian actors. There are a huge number, more than Leos. But that makes sense because the United States is a Cancer country, and so they like the Cancerians. A tremendous number of Cancerians.
If you keep going, you're going to cover every sign.
Yeah. Well, it's really that group of the late winter really has a high percentage, and I think it's because of the fact that they like working As you get into the later sites, they like working in big environments with big groups.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to
Which is
do
movies.
a project on actors and see if there is some way, like there are actors who seem to play the same role all the time. And when you're watching their movie or television show, you never lose sight of the fact that it's actor XYZ playing the role of whatever.
Yeah.
And there are other actors who you swear they're the person they're playing.
They
So
submerge.
much so that if they're playing someone who's alive and you see the alive person, you say, they don't look right. Because they've so embodied that role on their own. So there would be interesting to see what would differentiate one actor from another to give you that kind of
Yes.
tonality in their performances.
Lonnie's saying it would be helpful to see this. The reality is we actually wrote an article about this. And about the difference in what's called the dignities and how there's certain people who just stand out and there's other people who can submerge themselves very easily into roles.
Right.
And you have some very successful actors who are very good at that. They disappear into the role. I was saying about the late winter people, as you go later in the signs, starting with Aries, Taurus, so forth, the space people gets bigger and bigger. Well, there's nothing quite as spacious as a movie set with all the technology. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Capricorns and Aquarians like that so much.
Not just the movie set with the technology, but the imagination is boundless. So it's,
Yeah, they like being part of a big group.
Yeah.
When you get earlier in the sign, they like more intimate spaces. There's so many components. Astrology's been practiced for thousands and thousands of years, and with the explosion of the computer technology and the World Wide Web, it's massively increased its potential, and we've become part. We were always part of a community, but now we're part of this worldwide community of astrologers. I mean, through social media and such, we're connected with so many people in the field, and it's fascinating. And we have our big conferences, and we've always had the big conferences, but now we're in contact, throughout the whole course of the year.
Well, and to me, I have always thought that astrology was a tool. And the reason that I feel that as opposed to being a hobby or some kind of, parlor trick or something like that, is that it all grew out of observation. And most of we're also naturopathic doctors, and in our health work, I love the idea that the knowledge about herbs grew also out of this observation. So when you see a plant in nature and it changes color, something's going with their acid-alkaline balance. And so that contributed to the body of knowledge. Or a tree that doesn't have any fungal growth on it when other trees around them have a lot of fungal growth. That has some kind of component in it that may be helpful for you if you have problems like that. Well, it was the same way with observation in astrology. They would watch the skies, they would know when the seasons were going to be changing, they knew whether it was the right time to plant or not the right time to plant. And so these observational sciences are part of what make the world an understandable place to live in.
Describes it perfectly. Come back and see us next time.
For Astrologers Chatting Over Coffee.